After Joseph Nicollet explored the headwaters of the Mississippi, he likely returned to Fort Snelling with more questions than answers. Remember, he came to America having discovered the strange legends involving Pierre-Charles Le Sueur and Baron Louis Armand de Lame d'Arcy, the Baron of Lahontan. Later, it would become an official government mapping expedition, but in 1836, it was a private obsession to find Lahontan's Long River, the River of Death, and the location of Caput Mortuum, located at a watershed, according to Lahontan's tall tale, surrounded by 3 mysterious tribes with access to copper. He also searched for the mysterious Fort LeHullier, which Pierre-Charles Le Sueur created in uncharted Dakota territory, where he infamously mined Blue Earth, for his puppet masters back in Montreal and Paris. So was the watershed of the Mississippi River and Red River the location of Baron Lahontan's Caput Mortuum? Apparently not. So when Nicollet returned to Fort Snelling, having helped extinguish the building tensions between the Chippewa and Sioux, he lingered, and in 1837 he began his second expedition. Instead of pressing west, he traveled into Wisconsin to unravel a few other mysteries. Although Joseph Nicollet's public records of the expedition clearly describe his trip up to the headwaters and back, his map seems to tell another story. Remember, one of his major clues about Caput Mortuum's location was that it could be found at a watershed. Sure enough, notice the expedition path veering away to scout the eastern watershed between the Mississippi and what is now known as the St. Louis River. Miles north of modern-day Duluth, you can see references to a portage between the northern watershed of the St. Louis and the Vermilion River at a place where Nicollet labels Musabe Heights, which is the Chippewa word for giant, yet is also a reference to a member of his own expedition. What's going on, Professor Nicollet? While Duluth obviously gets its namesake from the explorer Daniel Greysolon, the Sieur of Duluth, a scholar like Joseph Nicollet likely already did his homework. About the same time Monsieur Duluth explored Lake Superior, Pierre-Charles Le Sueur was stomping around the shores of Lake Superior also. While history remembers the French making an alliance with the Chippewa, Pierre-Charles Le Sueur not only made contact with the Dakota, but even managed to secure a peace treaty between the Sioux and Chippewa 150 years before Joseph Nicollet sealed the deal. Le Sueur brought back Chief Teoscate of the Metawakanton Band of Dakota. As a representative of the dwellers of Spirit Lake, Teoscate traveled with Le Sueur to Montreal, where he was supposed to open the doors to the French in a new era of peace and prosperity. Instead, Teoscate suddenly fell ill and died. And with him, Le Sueur's plans for peace and exploration also died. Nicollet likely knew this backstory, but being more than just a scientist and politician, Nicollet had a keen interest in tales involving the supernatural. Today, there are tales of a sleeping dragon and ghosts for the 2 girls that haunt Glensheen Mansion. But there is an older tale that has lasted to this day. It is a story that resembles Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. In the tale, we have a Dakota man named Chaska and an Ojibwe maiden named Wetona. Since the Dakota and Ojibwe were vying for control of northern Minnesota at the time, this rivalry is as fierce as the Montagues and Capulets. In the tale, the 2 lovers flee to the island for safety, and when warriors went searching for them, they only found Wetona's canoe and 2 empty pair of moccasins. Yet, Nicollet likely had come across an even older legend that intrigued him, whether he learned it from the Ojibwe elder and guide Chagobe, the Potawatomi in St. Louis, or the surviving Micmac along the Atlantic. He learned of the migration story of the Anishinaabe, which tells how prophets warned them to flee the Atlantic and follow the mysterious Migi shell on a 7-stop migration over several eras. Like denominations in a Christian church have different views on biblical texts, the Anishinaabe people have different tellings of the 7 fires. There is agreement in the first few stopping places, but the identities and sequence of the last vary. Nearly all believe Madeline Island of the Apostle Islands is a stopping place, but some describe it as the 6th and others describe it as the 7th. In the 6th variation of the legend, the Anishinaabe left Minnesota and continued westward, with some settling in the Turtle Mountain region in North Dakota, and others pushing even further into the Canadian Rockies. Here in Minnesota, the common telling of the legend is that Spirit Island became the 6th stopping place before turning back to Madeline Island as the final stopping place. For both the Oceti-Sakowin and the Anishinaabe, their creation stories feature an island rather than an ark. So the tale of Chaska and Wetona deepens when you discover that the Oceti-Sakowin revered islands as an Eden metaphor associated with the turtle, and the Eastern Dakota, the Isanti or Isanyathi, saw themselves as guardians of the frontier, while the Anishinaabe, who also revered islands with their turtle metaphors, were following prophecy to claim a new homeland where food grows on the water in the form of wild rice. The reconciliation of 2 warring enemies became a powerful metaphor for finding common ground rather than killing each other for our differences. Madeline Island, a pleasant name for an island with a dark past. Prior to the 1600s, the territory belonged to the Eastern Sioux, the Dakota of the Oceti-Sakowin, the 7 Fires Nation. Motivated by their 7 prophecies, the Ojibwe migrated from their 5th stopping place at Sault Ste. Marie and gained a foothold on the cluster of islands now known as the Apostle Islands. Generations earlier, the Anishinaabe people left their homes along the Atlantic and began traveling to stopping places in Montreal, Niagara Falls, Round Lake, Manitoulin Island, and the rapids of Sault Ste. Marie. There's division amongst scholars if Madeline Island is the 6th or 7th stopping place. The arrival of the Ojibwe to Madeline Island began a century of conflict between the Ojibwe and Dakota. Although a fan of Native American lore, Joseph Nicollet had several reasons for visiting Madeline Island in 1837. While the Ojibwe named their island after a native bird, the English namesake for the island comes from the name of Michael Cadeau's wife in 1808. However, in 1693, French fur traders Pierre-Charles and Nicolas Perrault expanded the fur trade market to Madeline Island. Coincidentally, Perrault's wife also happened to be named Madeline. For the better part of a decade, Perrault and Lesueur tried to safely open trade to the territory held by the Dakota, and at Madeline Island, the French found a motivated partner in the Chippewa. Perrault's nickname, Iron Legs, comes from the fact that the French began to supply weapons to the Ojibwe. For another generation, the Ojibwe pressed the Dakota for access to Minnesota, and in the legendary Battle of Kathio, the dwellers of Spirit Lake lost their sacred homeland. This era of conflict greatly affected both nations. Historian William Warren, who came from both French and Ojibwe parents, recorded what he knew of the migration of his people, including an era of darkness for those living on the island. If Warren's tales are true, desperation led to desperate measures involving murder and cannibalism. This dark time period led to an abandonment of the island due to the ghosts of the slain haunting the island. For Joseph Nicollet, he had a very personal reason to be traveling to the trading post of La Pointe. During his expedition to the headwaters, Nicollet almost lost his life when the pillager warriors took him prisoner and brought him to Chief Flatmouth, who'd been receiving lies about the intentions of the Dakota from Henry Schoolcraft's agents in La Pointe. So, who's Schoolcraft? Think of him as the anti-Nicollet. As the founding father of Manifest Destiny, he just created the Treaty of Washington, which ceded 13 million acres of Ojibwe land to the U.S. government. Yes, Schoolcraft did marry an Ojibwe woman, which allowed him to learn enough about Ojibwe customs to sell them out. And then he later divorced her to remarry a woman who opposed interracial marriage. As an expert on the Ojibwe, Schoolcraft wrote the official version of the lore and history, including the Hiawatha Tales. As a man of peace, Nicollet openly despised Manifest Destiny and wanted to write a book explaining the true nature of the Native American cultures he visited. Nicollet's accounts were not published in his lifetime. Nicollet had other issues with Schoolcraft also. In 1822, Schoolcraft was part of an expedition that was also looking for the headwaters of the Mississippi. Coincidence? Well, after finding the headwaters, Schoolcraft coyly named the lake Itasca. Was that an Ojibwe word? No, it was a coy play on the phrase veritas caput, which means truth about the head. While it's easy to believe it was a simple reference to the headwaters of the Mississippi, remember that Baron Lahontan marked his caput mortem location with a symbol from alchemy, the death head. With Nicollet well versed in alchemy terms, he likely understood that veritas caput likely was Schoolcraft's way of peeing on the place. So shortly after putting his science to the test, Nicollet not only discredited Schoolcraft's Lake Itasca as the source of the Mississippi, but he then went to Madeline Island for a private conversation with his rival. It certainly would have been fun to be a fly on the wall during that meeting. Ultimately, Team Schoolcraft defeated Team Nicollet and won the West, but not before Joseph Nicollet put up a fight. After traveling to Madeline Island along the St. Croix River Valley, Joseph Nicollet uses his scientific method to cross off another watershed during his 1837 trip. And on his return path, he investigates the headwaters of the Wisconsin River before using the waterway to send him through the heart of the Wisconsin Territory. Remember, Nicollet was not only obsessed with Baron Lahontan's caput mortem location at a watershed, but he was also fascinated with a fellow French countryman, Pierre-Charles, who roamed the big woods like Paul Bunyan. For this reason, it's no wonder he swung so far south on his return trip. Lake Pepin holds both historical and mythological significance. Historically, this is where Le Sueur and Perrot built Fort Antoine in 1689. With this outpost built on the frontier of the Sioux territory, Le Sueur played with fire, and the outpost quickly fell to ruin when war broke out on the continent. In what was locally known as King William's War and internationally as the 9 Years' War. With French and English colonists waging war against each other, history forgets how the mighty Sioux, the Oceti-Sakowin, reclaimed the territory throughout the region as French fur traders withdrew all the way back to Montreal. As you can see on his map, Nicollet noted an old French trading fort, and at its northern border near modern-day Red Wing, he changed the name of the Cannon River to the Lahontan River, which means Nicollet believed this to be the Long River described by the Baron. Sure enough, past the headwaters of the Lahontan River, we can see Nicollet's name for the River of Death has been changed to the Le Sueur River. Geographically, there is a unique feature along Lake Pepin that likely would have been noted by the keen mind of Nicollet. Back in Duluth, he heard the tale of two star-crossed lovers born to families that hated each other. Up north, this maiden was called Watona. At Lake Pepin, she was known as Winona, which is the Dakota word for daughter. In this version of the tale, she falls in love with a bad boy, a French fur trader, who abandons her for the love of another, prompting her to make a tragic suicide leap from what is now known as Maiden Rock, just a few miles north of where Le Sueur built his fort. Coincidentally, Le Sueur left Fort Antoine to marry Marguerite Messier, a beautiful young aristocrat with ties to the powerful Le Moyne family in Montreal. Yet Lake Pepin also holds another legend sure to entertain Nicollet. Today it's known as Pepi, the fanciful water monster with a humorous history going back to the 1870s. Before that, however, the local Dakota would trade in their birch bark canoes for dugout canoes, lest the water monster puncture their thin-walled vessels. Like Loch Ness, Lake Pepin spans 22 miles, with an average width of 2 miles, wider than Loch Ness, yet much more shallow. While Nicollet didn't say much about the lake, his track record of visiting Devil's Lake, Lake Manitou, Spirit Lake, Spirit Island, and many other locations of supernatural interest, it is no wonder that when he did locate the site of Lahontan's Caput Mortem and Le Sueur's Fort La Hillier, he labeled the entire region with the bold word Undine, which in alchemy is the water element. Labeling the region Undine also aligned to a Dakota figure of creation, which is manifested in the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, known as Tunwin, or the Blue Woman. So as Nicollet returned to Fort Snelling in 1837, I'm sure he was pondering some of these watery legends.